This happened to me last summer when I was 23. I wasn't a very outgoing kid at the time. If I ever did anything social, it was because my degenerate friends had somehow dragged me out of the house. This was one of those times, well, it was supposed to be. My friend Ralph invited me to a house party at like 8 p.m. It was pretty spontaneous, but I had nothing going on, so I reluctantly agreed to go with him. I knew he was going to give me crap if I refused. I can't even lie, though, the idea of a party, even with strangers, sounded more appealing than being alone. Ralph was a few towns over from me, so it made more sense for us to drive separately instead of going together. He gave me the address, and I was on my way. The literal second I pulled onto the street, Ralph bailed at the last minute. Rightfully so, I was super frustrated. How could he bail on me like this? There I was, feeling like a complete idiot outside a stranger's house. Annoyed but determined not to waste the night, I decided to go in. I drove all the way here, I thought. Might as well go inside. I walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. The host, Crispin, greeted me warmly. He was instantly likable, charismatic and friendly without being a douchebag. He introduced me around, and things were actually less awkward than I had anticipated. People were really friendly to me despite not knowing who I was. There were even a few girls I had my eyes on. I decided to enjoy the party and hit the booze hard. It was getting pretty late, but the party was still raging. Admittedly, I might have overdone it with the drinking. At one point, I was so nauseous and dizzy that I needed a break. It must have been close to 3 a.m. at that point. I went upstairs to look for a bathroom, but they were all occupied. The house was deceptively big. Granted, it was probably the alcohol, but I was literally getting lost stumbling through the maze of hallways up there. After making it to the top floor, I found a door leading to what seemed like an attic or storage room. Desperate for privacy, I figured it was as good a place as any to pull myself together. I groped around blindly for the light switch, but there was none. This was definitely an attic or something, as there was also dust everywhere. There was a window in the far corner, which I opened, allowing the cool night breeze to wash over me. There was a solid minute there where I was seriously considering throwing up onto the roof. The breeze somewhat cured my nausea, though, so I just kept my head hung out of the window. It was dark outside, and the quiet was a refreshing contrast to the boisterous chaos downstairs. Sometimes all you need to restore your state of mind is a gentle breeze and some peace and quiet. Just as I was about to close the window and head back, I heard a faint noise, footsteps on the roof shingles. That didn't make any sense, though. Was I going crazy? Curious, I climbed out onto the roof. In all honesty, there was probably a 0% chance I would have done that if I had been sober. I slowly stood up and looked around. In the moonlight, I saw something terrifying. There were two masked figures with bags emerging from another window. It dawned on me, Crispin's house was being robbed. I started panicking. Should I shout? Confront them? Then a more pressing question hit me: what if they were armed? In my clumsy state of disbelief, I slipped and scuffed one of the shingles pretty loudly. One of the burglars heard it and jolted his head in my direction. Our eyes briefly met, and I froze. He nudged his partner, and the two of them quickly started making their way across the roof. Adrenaline surged through me. I couldn't let them get away. Crispin had been so welcoming, and I felt a surge of loyalty. I decided to act. I quietly followed the burglars across the roof, keeping a safe distance. They headed towards a sloping part of the roof for an easier escape. As they climbed down, I pulled out my phone to dial 911 but fumbled in my drunken state, dropping it. The phone clattered loudly, and the burglar turned sharply. "Who's there?" one of them hissed. Heart pounding, I ducked and scanned my surroundings, spotting a loose roof shingle. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it towards them. It missed, but the noise startled them, causing one to lose his footing. He tumbled down the roof, crashing into the gutter before falling to the ground. The other burglar, now panicked, leaped to a neighboring tree and scrambled down. I rushed to the edge of the roof and saw the fallen burglar groaning on the ground. I needed to alert everyone. As I turned to head back, I heard sirens. Someone else must have called the cops. I stumbled back into the attic room and made my way downstairs, trying to appear calm. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the drama outside. I found Crispin laughing and chatting with guests. "Crispin, you need to call the police. There's been a robbery." "I saw the burglar on the roof," I said. Crispin's face turned from amusement to shock. "Are you serious?" he said as he hurried to make the call. I explained what happened. The party mood shifted from celebration to concern. Apparently, one of Crispin's neighbors had coincidentally already called the police to file a noise complaint, which was an incredibly ironic turn of good fortune. When they arrived, I recounted my story, leading them to the injured burglar. The man was arrested, but his partner had fled. The party ended abruptly. People started scattering, and the lights got flipped on. I tried my best to act sober, but even after all that happened, I was still stumbling a bit. Crispin thanked me profusely, still in disbelief. As for me, I was just glad I could help despite the bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Looking back, I still can't really explain why the burglars would have chosen a house having a party to rob, but maybe they had prior knowledge of the house and knew no one would be upstairs. I figured that would be the end of the story, but fast forward a few months, and I've got quite the update. I was playing video games at Ralph's house one night when he got a call from Crispin, who invited us over for a few beers. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realized the two of them were that close. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to Crispin's house was that the front door and every window in sight were completely different. Was I not remembering his house right? I could have sworn the windows and the front door had been white, but they were all gray and much more heavy-duty looking. Crispin waved us in, and we went down to his basement. We cracked a few beers and started playing a game of pool. To my surprise, he actually recognized me from the party and thanked me again for my trouble. What he told us was actually crazy, though. Apparently, the burglar the police caught that night refused to snitch on his partner and was currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. The police hadn't been able to get any leads into catching the other guy, though. Crispin told us that not even a week after the incident, his family started receiving threatening letters from an unknown sender, some of which included pictures of Crispin and his family members. Obviously, they reported these occurrences, but the police had no real leads. A month after that, Crispin's mom noticed a suspicious vehicle circling the house at around 1 a.m., and a few days later, Crispin's dad claimed that things in their backyard had been gone through and moved around. In response, Crispin's dad increased their home security and even went as far as to replace and reinforce all their doors and windows. I was shocked. This was still an ongoing issue for Crispin, and I had no idea how serious a situation like this could get. Summer's fast approaching, and I'm sure I'll have another update when I see Crispin again. I'm 18 years old and going to be a freshman in college this September. This past July, My friend Zelda held a pool party in her backyard as a sort of graduation party, minus any of her family being around because her parents were away. She often has the house to herself, so her parents' house is the go-to spot for a lot of hangouts. She invited like 100 people from our grade. There had to be upwards of 150 people there at the night's peak. I was one of the first to show up with my friend Jonah because we're close with Zelda, so we wanted to help out a little bit. By the time people started showing up, everyone congregated slowly from the kitchen and living room to outside in the backyard by the pool. Some people brought their bathing suits and jumped into the pool, others just jumped in their underwear, and then, of course, most others just stood around the pool. She has a huge backyard. At a certain point, so many people were at the party that it was clear as day people were bringing friends from other schools because we didn't know everyone there. Zelda was getting mad because she made it clear she didn't want randoms. In fact, unfamiliar people seemed to be just barging through the gate, not even accompanied by people from our school or grade. There wasn't much we could do, though. The party was already too crazy to easily control. Zelda did throw in our class group chat not to bring any more randoms or they'd be asked to leave. The problems seemed to slow down after that. At around 1 a.m., the police came to the house and had to shut down the party due to multiple complaints from neighbors, so the music was turned off, and 99% of the guests were asked to leave. Mostly everyone cleared out except a few close friends, including some of Zelda's girlfriends, Letitia and I, and a few other guy friends. We helped do some cleaning, like picking up all the empty cans and bottles. Eventually, it was just 4 of us left there. I'm talking at like 3 a.m., if not later. Since it was hot outside, we migrated to the inside of the house in the air conditioning, where we were just chilling in the living room, continuing to drink. Then we all heard a distinct crack from upstairs, and we went silent. Zelda was the first to ask what was that as we all looked at each other with these wide-eyed, half-laughing, half-freaked-out faces. Letitia and I left, teasing Zelda that someone was upstairs in her room, and she begged us to stop and check it out, so we did. We went upstairs to Zelda's room. It was clear. We then went to the guest room that used to be her older brother's room, and we found one of our friends, Eudora, passed out in the bed. We went downstairs to tell her that Eudora was upstairs and knocked out. I guess that gave her a sigh of relief. Looking back, that didn't much explain a sound coming from upstairs if he was knocked out in bed, though, but we weren't exactly the most coherent at that moment. Eventually, Zelda and her friend Mia went to sleep in her room, Letitia fell asleep on the couch, and I went to her parents' bed. None of us were okay to drive anywhere. I can't remember how much time passed before I remember one of the girls screaming in the next room over, and then both of them. It was a heart-dropping kind of moment, but I didn't know if they were messing around with each other at first or not, but I realized pretty quickly the screams were way too real. I burst out of the bed and went to Zelda's room and opened the door. The lights were out. I could barely see anything except for the 2 girls huddled up, hugging each other in the corner of the room, basically curled up on the floor. I saw what they were screaming at. There was a tall person in the opposite corner of the room, on the other side of the bed from them. I saw him looking at me in the doorway. I yelled at the girls to run, and they did. There was so much yelling that even Eudora woke up and came out as the girls ran downstairs, screaming that the man was touching their feet. We followed, but looking back with 3 guys there, we regrettably didn't try to overpower that one man. We all left the house, and one of us called the police, waiting by the neighbor's house with the neighbors, possibly the same ones who called the cops on the party. We didn't see the man leave the front door ever, and after police searched the house and couldn't find him, that meant he left through the back door. None of us recognized who that man was. It was probably an older man who knew Zelda somehow that snuck into the house during the commotion of the party and thought Zelda would be alone after the party. It's some sick, scary stuff. Whether we could have overpowered him or not, we'll never know because we don't know if he was armed. I've owned and lived in the same house for 8 years. It's a normal family-sized home, which was relevant when I had roommates. But when they moved out and it just became me living here, I had nothing to do with the extra space. It was technically a 4-bedroom house, but I only used 2 of the bedrooms. One is my main bedroom and one is the game room. The other 2 rooms were on the far end of the upstairs hallway. One had a few storage boxes in it, and the other was completely empty. After getting out of work at 9 o'clock, I picked up Wendy's on the way home and pretty much went right to the game room. I was off tomorrow, so what better to do than game all night? I put my headphones on and loaded up COD, but before I had time to even load into a match, I thought I heard something that sounded like a knock at the front door. I took my headset off and listened, but not hearing anything and figuring they would have knocked again if there was someone there, I went back to my game. Probably a whole 2 hours went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like either a knock or a door closing or something like that, but with my headphones on and with my room door closed, it was way too quiet for me to tell. I got up and opened the door, looking out into the hallway and waiting for that sound to come again. After a minute, though, I went downstairs and looked out the front door. Nobody was outside my house, and everything seemed normal. Having been hearing these sounds, though, I obviously made sure the door was locked before going back upstairs. To be a bit more cautious, I left my room door open this time, so if it happened again, maybe I'd hear it better. I put my headset back on and continued gaming. I played through a whole round, so like 20-ish minutes. As the game ended and I leaned back in my chair, a figure rushed past the open doorway, just off to the side of my view. I immediately threw my headphones off and jumped from my chair, horrified and unsure what to do. I just stared at the doorway. I didn't get the courage to finally move for several minutes. When I looked into the hallway, though, and eventually the rest of the house, nobody was there, but the front door was unlocked again. When police came and investigated, it was clear that the person had been hiding and very likely living in the empty room. I hadn't been in there for weeks or maybe even months, so all this time they could have been just on the other side of the wall from me, and I had no idea. It's really scary to think about, especially if I'd happened to confront him. There's no saying what he would have done. When I was 25, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate, Instagram, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood subreddit. I had a guy named Chad reach out to me on Instagram stating he had a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Chad and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently, he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 15-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Chad right out front of the house where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was that he was really short, eye level with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was already furnished. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was spent settling in. Chad, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Chad offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers and restaurants were. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea. I just needed a room. I said I wasn't hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, "Come on, just a couple drinks." I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up and went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit, I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home, did my laundry, and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved, like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left. And it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Chad? No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Chad wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Chad the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night, though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I awoke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Chad. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I was asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Chad saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response I thought out a little longer and basically said how I hoped he could sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and I just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused and upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknob sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill, though. There was a knock at the door one day when Chad wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Chad, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately, that Chad has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Chad for the entire month, and I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number, and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now I just needed to tell Chad and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank. I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No, what do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind. It just seems like you're running away out of here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of the family reasons. He said okay and left. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Chad. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shoo." I said, "Please don't hurt me," and he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me, and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment." He started to caress my leg and he said, "I don't mean to scare you," right after I said he was scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Chad come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Chad then owing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so. Actually, the whole time the police were there he tried his best to act like some normal dude. I could tell one of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women, but Chad denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said, she said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never, and will never, live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again, or just anyone I don't know for that matter. We started in New Jersey, where we're from, and made our way west. It was a great time. We saw stuff that we always talked about seeing. After day 3, we finally hit the dreaded boring part of the drive, Nebraska. Nothing but cornfields as far as the eye can see. It was about 6:30 p.m., and the sun was starting to set. I looked at the gas gauge, and it read 1/4 of a tank. I told my buddy we should start looking for a gas station. He checked the GPS, and nothing for at least 100 miles showed up. I started to get nervous because the last thing we need is to run out of gas in the middle of Nebraska with literally nothing around at night. That's how horror movies start. Finally, as we crested a small hill, my fears, at least for the time being, were put to rest. Down the road, maybe half a mile, we saw a blue sign that said, "Gas next exit." Little did I know that the next exit was another 30 miles away. So we drove and drove, all the while with one eye on the gauge. Finally, we saw the exit and got off. The gas light on the dashboard came on, warning us we had less than a gallon left. The sign pointed to the right at the end of the exit ramp and said, 10 miles gas. The car we were driving was a 200 Ford Explorer. Being an old SUV, I knew it barely got 14 miles to the gallon on a good day. I shared a look with my friend, we both shrugged. I made the turn, and we continued on. The sun had now gone down, and for those of you who have never been to the Midwest at night, it's not like being in the city. When the sun goes down, there is no ambient light whatsoever. No street lights, no lights from a major city giving off the comfortable orange glow, nothing. Just an endless darkness in all directions. Even the highway offered no lights. I turned on the high beams and could barely see 50 feet in front of me. My spider sense was tingling at this point, but we pressed on. What other choice did we have? Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. I kept my eyes peeled for any possible animals that might dart out in front of me. Suddenly, the car started to shudder. My friend and I both shared an, "Oh, look," as we started going up another hill. The car barely made it up and crested the hill. As we did, we saw our salvation, lights from a gas station. If I had only known what was going to happen next, I would have gotten out of the car and run back to the interstate. We rolled down the hill and entered what I can only describe as a ghost town. There were buildings, shops, and houses, every single one of them boarded up. There was one exception, a church sat opposite the station. One of those old ones you would usually see in New York or Paris. It appeared to be sandstone with a huge steeple. It looked like it was brand new, with a nicely manicured lawn and a huge red wooden door. The stained glass windows that lined the outside had pictures telling a story. However, instead of telling the story of the Stations of the Cross or the Virgin Mary, as most churches had, these showed depictions of people burning in fire, their faces twisted in agony under the cloven hoof of what I could only think was the devil. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something here just didn't feel right. The car died about 500 feet from the gas station, so we got out and pushed it the rest of the way. As we got out, I heard something barely audible, almost like a humming, coming from the church. My buddy didn't hear anything, so I assumed I must just be tired. The pump was new, with one of the credit card readers. Which struck me as odd, considering everything else in this town, save the church, looked like it hadn't had anyone living in it for at least 30 years. We filled up without incident, and as we finished, the sound, which now sounded like a humming droning, got louder. We got back into the car and left. The road we came in on was a one-way, so the only way out was to go further into the town and hopefully find a road that led back to the interstate. As we drove, we saw more light being reflected off the buildings. We pulled into a town square where there was a huge stage and hundreds of chairs set up for what looked like a concert of some sort. The light was coming from a bonfire in the center of the audience area. As we pulled further into the square, we could see a guy playing music for no one. There wasn't one person in any of the seats. I used to work in the music industry. I know a sound check when I see one. Usually, that happens before the concert, so a musician can check his or her sound with the guy running the soundboard. With no one around, this was not it. He was covered in sweat, screaming his music and playing almost like his life depended on it. We came to a T intersection and a stop sign. We had the windows down because it was summer and we were trying to save gas by not using the AC. The droning humming I heard had gotten louder. It was almost like it was in my head, beating my brain. Now it sounded like it was coming from the buildings themselves. It got louder and louder. The guy playing music screamed even louder, almost like he was fighting the sound. Then a whole lot of things happened at once. The humming reached fever pitch and then stopped abruptly. The bonfire went out. The guy on stage stopped playing. Down on the right of the road, which looked like it was the only way back to the highway, came a mob of people with pitchforks, boards, rocks, and one guy had what looked like a samurai sword. Looking back now, I remember thinking it strange that no one had a gun considering where we were. They came running towards us, screaming and waving their weapons. My buddy and I covered our heads in anticipation of the beating of our lives. They started pounding on the car, even going so far as to break one of the little windows in the back seat. I threw the car in four-wheel drive and slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, plastering a few people onto the windshield, but ultimately we broke through the mob. The ones who weren't knocked down from the impact of the car started storming the stage. They jumped onto it and started assaulting the musician with their weapons, his screams echoing off the derelict buildings. I didn't waste any time. I slammed on the gas pedal, cut the wheel, and sped out down the road to the right, the whole time with my friend screaming obscenities. We got back to the highway and drove for another 30 miles until we hit our destination for the night, where our hotel was. We got into our room, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. As I put my bags down, I looked at my friend and he looked at me. We both agreed to go to the police in the morning, as it was now about 3 a.m. The next day, we woke up, packed our overnight bags, and went out to our car. We immediately drove to the police department and asked to speak to a detective, as we had a crime to report. A small bald man from a desk stood up and invited us to come and sit with him. We then proceeded to tell him the whole thing. When we were finished, he asked us, pale as a ghost, "Did you tell anyone else this?" We, of course, responded in the negative, to which he replied, "Good. Keep it that way." With his hands shaking, he showed us the door, and we left. We never spoke of it to anyone else.